All right. Welcome to the final edition speaker series for the academic year 2020-2021. My name is Dr. Nicholas Hudson, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Office of Student Orientation, Leadership, and Engagement. And welcome to our April speaking year series that's focusing on education reform. And before we get into that fully, I just wanted to, say thank you very much to everyone that has attended our speaker series this year. We focus on one of the elements of global citizenship as determined by Oxfam. And this year our focus has been on social justice. And we're going to cover a little bit about that, but I do wanted to say this has been a very illuminating year where I hope a lot of you have been able to become educated on these topics, these very important topics that we've had covered, and we continue to see them happening today, right? We talk about social justice and inequities in the world, and we continue to see, for example, innocent Black men in particular being murdered across the country by police officers. And just this last week, we had another another murder in Minnesota. We had another 2 weeks ago in Chicago, a murder of a 13-year-old young man. And so we know that social justice issues aren't solely focused on issues of race or criminal justice reform or police brutality or things of that nature. We know that it's very much more systemic in place, but it is important to be conscious of that all around. And so today, we're going to focus a little bit on the impact of marginalization on the educational opportunities, because we know that students and children and youth that are marginalized, minoritized, ending up having less opportunities across the board. And that leads to less equitable outcomes in life, whether it's health related or other areas. And we're very fortunate today to have Dr. Haley Kazen present, one of our own here at TAMU, present on this subject. And Dr. Kazen holds a Bachelor's of Arts in Spanish from UT Austin, a Master's of Arts in Sociology from UT El Paso, a Master's in English from TAMU, and a PhD in Curriculum and Instruction from College Station. She taught her first course here at TAMU over 20 years ago, and so we're super fortunate to have her here. And she's just been a fixture here at this institution. And so every time we were able to have her join us, it just makes us, all of us, very excited to have her. In 2020, she received the Excellence in Teaching First Year Seminars Award from the National Resource Center for the First Year Experience in Students in Tradition. That is an absolute honor to be in her company as a colleague, but also as a faculty member as well. Dr. Kazen teaches a signature course entitled Another Perspective, which focuses on the marginalization of different groups here at in our society. And so we're super excited. Just a couple of housekeeping tips. I'm not able to get these folks in, but as a reminder, there's the Art for Social Change competition for those that are attending this program to become a International Leadership Fellow. That is due by next week, the 22nd. There are opportunities for folks to participate with it. So anyone, you don't have to be searching to become an International Leadership Fellow. It is a competition. It will be displayed next week, Friday. And so your artwork will be displayed. It could be a dance, a song. It could be a painting, pottery, etc. All of those are available for folks to participate, and there will be prizes. It will be judged. It'll be available there. So please make sure you sign up and RSVP on the TAMU Trailblazers. As always, we cover what is this concept of social justice across the board. It's important to understand what it is as we talk about this in context. There will also be a survey that will be sent out to you all that asks you to answer these questions. Social justice is the inclusion of everyone into the full benefits of society and the empowerment of people to participate fully in the cultural, economic, political, and social aspects of our society. And so this is the larger concept that, as we're talking about this today with Dr. Kazen, we're hopeful we're able to think about this concept of social justice and the ability to equally participate in all aspects of society as we're moving through. Also, it's important to note what is this concept of power. And power is the ability of or official authority to decide what is best for others. And how does this manifest itself inside of our educational system? It's very important. To decide who gets resources, right? There's actually landmark cases here in the state of Texas that relate to educational equity in terms of funding, equitable funding from the Supreme Court decision, which is Rodriguez versus San Antonio Independent School District from the 1970s that talked about equitable education funding. Privilege, there's this concept of privilege and those that have unearned access to resources only readily available, right? And we talk about privilege, but let's think about privilege in the context of a higher education setting. Higher education setting, we are privileged to be educated, whereas others, not only in the United States, but around the world, do not have the capacity to receive a higher education, similarly to the way we do here today. We also have this concept of oppression that exists, and oppression is a system that maintains advantage and disadvantage based on marginal group or social group membership and operates both intentionally and unintentionally on individual, institutional, and cultural levels. And so I'm sure Dr. Kazen in our conversation today will be discussing that as we move through. And so once again, we do encourage you all to follow us on social media. This will be available later today. Participate. But with that, I'm actually going to stop my share, and we're going to turn this over to Dr. Kazen to lead us through our conversation. We do ask that everyone remain muted today, we'll go ahead and ask questions. The chat conversation will be there. Will still be golden.
Okay, hold on. Can you guys hear me?
We can.
Okay, it's because I'm using my computer audio and my phone audio, but can you hear me through you can hear me now? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. And can you see my screen is the next question.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I'm getting really confused because it's on my phone and not my laptop. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. And I do want to hear from you on the chat on several questions, so I want it to be interactive. And so we'll start with this question. Actually a statement. Everyone in the United States has equal access to a quality education. So just put in the chat, yes or no, do you agree with that? Okay. Just trying to figure out my technical difficulties here, so bear with me. Okay. Yeah, so I cannot see anything that I'm doing here, so I really apologize because I'm having a lot of issues. Dr. Hudson, I'm gonna log off and log back in, so if you give me just 1 minute, I'm gonna try to do that because I'm having a lot of feedback over here.
You can also go ahead and send me the PowerPoint if you'd like.
Yeah, I'll do that too.
Great, thanks. All right, as we have learned throughout the course of the semester, Dr. Kazen, we still have you logged in. And so, as we learned through the course of the semester or year, or now a little bit over, we continue to be in this experience with navigating through some technical difficulties that happen. And so we greatly appreciate your capacity to navigate through. As we do enter the end of the semester, this is a great time to let everybody know about next year. Next year, we will be having the same series, the International Leadership Series. The International Leadership Series next year will be focusing on another aspect of our global citizenship. And that is, and I'm just pulling it up real quick here so that everybody has it. Next year, our focus is on human rights. I just had to make sure. So our speakers next year will be focusing on human rights, which I find to be an interesting context. So we're going to look at it at an international level. So next year's focus will be human rights. Dr. Kazen, are you good to go, or?
I think I'm ready. Can you see my screen?
We can, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Perfect.
Okay, so we're going to be talking about marginalized groups in education, as Dr. Hudson said. So we're going to cover 3 different groups: LGBTQIA, minoritized racial and ethnic groups, and low-income communities. So as I had asked you all before, to put in the chat, I'm sure everyone has already answered. I was just having some difficulties. Everyone in the United States has equal access to quality education. So I'm sure after this being the last in the series, that most of you guys said no, right? So I'm assuming that everyone, after being through several months of these, we have realized that there is not actually equal access to much of anything in the United States. So answer this in the chat for me, please. What number do you think this is? According to GLSEN, what percentage of students who report an incident of homophobia at school say the school did nothing in response or told them to ignore it? So you can just put your answer in the chat, and let's see what you guys come up with. Let's see, we have D. So it looks like most of you are going with like C and D, the higher numbers. So the answer, was D, right? The highest number. So according to Hall and Rogers, 74%, and again, we're talking about LGBTQ youth, what do they face at school? So 74% are victims of verbal harassment. Now I want you to realize that this is in 2018, right? So we are not talking too long ago. 17% were physically assaulted. 98%, almost everyone, has heard the word gay used negatively. 97% heard sexual orientation slurs. 51% of students heard anti-LGBTQIA remarks made by teachers and staff. 24% of students were discouraged from discussing or writing about LGBTQIA topics for class assignments. And 24% of secondary teachers did not, I think this is a really important one, did not feel they have an obligation to ensure a safe and supportive learning environment for LGBTQIA students. So almost a quarter of teachers don't feel like they have any obligation to ensure a safe environment for their students. And again, this was from an article by Hall and Rogers only 3 years ago. So I think that's pretty concerning. So we're gonna short video, and hopefully you guys can be able to hear it. And this is about the experience of LGBTQ youth.
Dr. Kazen, we're not hearing anything?
Mm. Well, there's subtitles. I don't know why the audio is not working, but hopefully you can read the subtitles. So did anything jump out at you guys in that video? It's because I'm on my phone audio, but the videos are playing through my computer, which I don't have any audio on, but you do have subtitles. So what jumped out at you about what some of those students were saying? So if you can just put something in the chat if something really jumped out at you. Anything that surprises you from the video or the statistics that I showed you earlier? Physical assault, all happening at schools with young students. Right, and I think sometimes we don't realize that that's happening, how even the teachers make them unfeel safe. Yeah, Justin, that's actually what jumps out at me also. And the fact that the young girl, where the teacher every day would tell her, don't be messing with the girls, don't be messing with the girls, like really calling attention to her every day, and it made her feel deeply uncomfortable. And so, yeah, I think you're right, Justin. I mean, all of these things, but I agree with you, Justin, that the fact that the teachers are not very protective of their students, and it doesn't seem to matter if they have a safe learning environment. So a question for you guys to answer, and you can just answer in the chat. How does this treatment, so imagine, and the course I teach is called Another Perspective. So I ask my students often to put themselves in the place of a member of this marginalized group. So I'm asking you to put yourself in that place. And how do you think this kind of treatment, the fear of not being safe, the fear of that teachers aren't going to protect you, how do you think that affects the education of LGBTQ youth? I mean, how effective do you think their schooling is if they're going to school every day and fearing that they're going to be assaulted, fearing that they're not going to be protected, fearing that they're going to hear homophobic slurs every day? What effect do you think that has on their ability to have a good education? So we'll go back to that first question. Is their education equal to people who are not part of this marginalized group? Just based on what they have to face every day. What do you guys think? They might spend their time trying to please others instead of focusing on their studies. Okay. So some of them do, you saw the one who said, well, people would question him about his sexuality, and he would just say, oh, no, I'm straight, whatever, just try to get by, like so focused on trying to get by. they're not going to feel safe enough to go to school and learn there. Yeah, so having that fear every day and having to fear for your safety, it probably doesn't lend itself very well to being open to education. Imagine not being able to be your authentic self. Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of things that might impact the quality of their education. It might prevent them from even continuing their education. That's a good one too. Like does not, and actually, there is a higher dropout rate among LGBTQ youth for just that reason. So you're exactly right. So this goes back to our first question that I originally asked you. Does everyone have equal access to quality education? Well, not if you are worried for your safety. You're worried that teachers are not going to protect you. I can imagine that your education is going to be equal. That's not equal access. All right, so next question. So you guys are going to answer A, B, or C. According to the Center for American Progress, compared with schools attended by at least 90% white students, those attended by at least 90% of students of color spend how much less per pupil annually? So give me a C. Dr. Hudson says C. B, C. We have a lot of B's and C's. Okay, so everyone pretty much thinks B or C. So the answer to this one is actually B. So schools that are attended by 90% students of color spend $733 less per year per pupil than schools that are 90% white. So what do some minoritized students face at school? In 2018, again, we're not talking too long ago, 89% of white students graduated from high school. 81% of Hispanic students and 79% of Black students. So those are high school graduates. In 2017, 48% of public school students were white, 15% of students were Black, and 27 were Hispanic. So I want you to see the disparity there. So even though, well, let's look at the next statistic. In 2016, 80% of teachers were white, 7% were Black, and 9% were Hispanic. So I want you to look at the differences in those statistics there. So even though only 48% of public school teachers are white, are not teachers, sorry, students, 48% of public school students are white, 80% of the teachers are Black, and 15% of the students are Black, 7% of teachers were Black. What that means and why that's important is because many times students do not have teachers that look like them. And this has been shown in study after study to be really important as far as persistence goes. So when students have teachers that look like them, they are more likely to persist and continue in their education. So I tell my students sometimes, you're living here in Laredo, you do have some advantages, right? So most of your teachers growing up probably were also Hispanic, spoke Spanish. But imagine yourself if you are, for those of you, some of you may have started school not speaking English. I know a lot of students did. And if you're in a place where the teacher does not speak Spanish, then what do? Right? So that creates a problem when you have this mismatch of the white teachers, Black teachers, and Hispanic teachers, and their mismatch with the students. So while 27% of students are Hispanic, only 9% of teachers are Hispanic. So this is one of the really big problems in this country is the lack of teachers of color. Think about that when we go to the next slide. So according to Ibram Kendi, and he wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, in case anyone is interested in that book, it's really very good. I recommend that you read it, How to Be an Anti-Racist. So according to Ibram Kendi, white teachers are about 40% less likely to believe a Black student will finish high school. So what does that mean? That means if a Black student has a white teacher, which is likely, right? Because we saw the statistics on how many white teachers there were versus how many teachers of color. So it's pretty likely that a Black student is going to go their entire educational career with a white teachers. So white teachers are 40% less likely to believe a Black student will finish high school. Low-income Black children who have at least one Black teacher in elementary school are 29% less likely to drop out. So think about what that means. If Black children have at least one Black teacher in elementary school, we're not saying every year, we're saying one Black teacher in elementary school, they're almost 30% less likely to drop out. So now you kind of see this problem. So we have a population, a teacher population that does not match the student population, and the ramifications are pretty clear and pretty important. So we have a lot of Black children, Hispanic children who will never see a teacher that looks like them, and this does contribute to a higher dropout rate. So we don't know the answer of how to get more teachers of color into the classroom, but it's definitely an issue that we need to think about because it does make a difference. So we're going to hear from a student about AP teacher diversity, which is even worse. So the statistics we saw a minute ago, they're more stark with AP teachers. Okay, so again, you might have to read the subtitles because, like I said, the audio on the computer is not working, but it should have subtitles. Okay, so even though there were some crazy subtitles on that, I think you get the gist. I think there was a lot of shocking statistics in there. So again, I'm just going to ask you to put in the chat what particularly surprised you about what he was saying. So we were talking about teachers of color, but he's specifically talking about AP. So he said out of 376 AP teachers, that less than 20 were Black and less than 20 were Hispanic. So what were some things that he said that you thought were surprising? What really jumped out at you? No, give me some. You can't hear me. There we go. The number of teaching minorities. Right, that's good. What else? People of color don't have as much opportunity, even though they're smart, right? So we have that the issue about the GT recommendations, that people of color weren't even being recommended for GT classes. Right. So a lot of issues here. Has anyone ever heard the term he used there, imposter syndrome? Have you guys heard of that? Yes. So imposter syndrome, some of you already know, means that, so Brandy says no, it just means that you feel like you don't belong in a place that you've been put, right? So basically an AP, he felt like, do I really belong here? And the reason why he felt that way is because he was one of the few Black students in AP class. And of course, even fewer, as he pointed out, even fewer teachers of color. And so it makes you start to wonder, do I even belong here? And a lot of people from marginalized groups have that, right? Imposter syndrome, including women. So we aren't going to, women is not one of the marginalized groups we're going to talk about today. But a lot of times women in powerful positions have imposter syndrome. So it's basically when you look around and you see that very few people look like you, and you start to wonder, uh, do I really belong here? Should I be here? That kind of thing. So, I mean, we saw the statistics and we see the one from Ibram Kendi, but when you hear this young man talk, it really sort of brings it home that having a teacher, I mean, again, having a teacher that looks like you is really very important to the success of these minoritized groups. So again, we go back to the question at the beginning. Does everyone have representation matters? Yes. So we go back to that question at the beginning, does everyone have equal access to quality education? And according to this, the answer is no. So we see imposter syndrome in higher education settings, especially at predominantly white institutions. Absolutely. I have another video that I show in my class that I didn't show here, but it was African American girls in college, exactly what Dr. Hudson is saying. And, people would actually ask them. So one girl, I think, was a STEM major. And so she went into her first chemistry lab or biology lab or engineering, something I don't remember. And someone actually asked her, are you in the wrong place? Like, because she was the only African American girl. So that was a double, right? In the field, she was a female and she was African American. And another student actually asked her, are you in the right place? Are you sure you're in the right classroom? So think about, what that does to people when they are not represented, when they have imposter syndrome, when they don't see teachers that look like them. And what's particularly concerning is the statistic on this page that white teachers are 40% less likely to believe a Black student will finish high school. So we know how important it is for teachers to believe in their students and believe that they can succeed. And if you don't have that, then it's really difficult to have that same access to a quality education that other students do. All right, so in the chat, answer this question. So how does the situation, so the underrepresentation of teachers of color and this issue of imposter syndrome, underrepresentation in AP classes, how do you think that affects the education of racially and ethnically minoritized students? So think about the question at the beginning. Do they have access to quality education? Do they have equal access to quality education? Before you answer, so think about that first question. So I guess kind of wrapping it up in your social justice and what the definitions that Dr. Hudson talked about at the beginning before, and I know you guys have seen those before. Those who have power to provide resources ultimately do not end up funding these students at high levels. Yeah, and the next group we're going to talk about is low-income communities, and it's all kind of wrapped up together, particularly the way we fund our public schools. Anything else? So you can imagine, I mean, and you heard it. I mean, you heard it from this particular student that it's really difficult to participate at high levels in AP and in GT when students aren't even getting recommended for GT and AP. So the students have to struggle more, which means they have to work double to be at the same level. I mean, they're basically going uphill, right? So they're not being recommended for GT and AP. So he said that's one of the things he wants to do is give everybody the opportunity to enroll in AP classes. So he wanted to change the system of counseling, because if you don't even have that opportunity, if you're not being recommended to get into GT and AP classes, that's issue number one. And then issue number two is when you're in these classes and you have imposter syndrome and you don't feel like you belong, and you have teachers that maybe don't feel like you belong, then that really impedes your academic success, right? Ultimately change your own and your family's future prospects if you're not provided with those opportunities. Absolutely. So in the next group, we're going to talk about, they're very interrelated, and that is communities that are living in poverty. So according to the Department of Education, by the end of 4th grade, low-income students are how many years behind grade level? By 4th grade, A, B, or C? We have a C. C. Maritza says C. C. Mary, Monica, Annabelle. So we got some C's and some B's. And the answer is B. So by the 4th grade, low-income students are already 2 years behind grade level. So here's some statistics for you for low-income students. They are less likely to have literacy-rich home environments. So what that means is they're less likely to have reading materials in their home. Low-income students are less likely to have informational resources about college. And again, that goes back to the education issue about not being in AP and GT classes. Children in low-income schools are less likely to have well-qualified teachers. So we see this a lot in Laredo even, because new teachers will go to, so I don't know if any of you have ever looked at, like just gone on the pages for UISD and LISD, particularly UISD though, for like when they hire teachers, they offer stipends to go to, like, for example, LBJ. So the schools that are located in the lower income areas pay stipend for teachers to go. But what happens is they have a very high turnover. So low income schools, the reason why they have less well-qualified teachers is not because the teachers there aren't good. It's typically because they're inexperienced. So new teachers go there because sometimes there's stipends related to that. And then when they get their experience, they move, they switch schools. And so you have a lot of turnover. So it doesn't mean that the teachers are not good teachers. They're just typically inexperienced, and the turnover is very high. So you can't really get a pattern going. In 2014, the high school dropout rate among persons 16 to 24 years old was higher in low-income families as compared to high-income families. Okay, so 11.6 higher the dropout rate. So what does this have to do? What does all this have to do with, again, the minoritized racial and ethnic groups? Well, a lot of times they're one in the same. So unfortunately, the way our school districts work, particularly in Texas, but in a lot of places, the school districts are funded by property taxes. And so if you are living in a low income area, which sometimes can be populated by racial and ethnic minorities, then your schools are typically funded at a lower rate. So really, this is kind of all wrapped in together. And it doesn't mean, and I think people get the idea sometimes that when we talk about low-income communities, it's always racial or ethnic minorities, and that isn't true. So in other parts of the United States, there are some very poverty-stricken areas that are predominantly white. So there is a tie-in. I mean, there are definitely connections between low income and racial and ethnic minorities, but not always. So I do want you to remember that there are areas where there's a very poverty-stricken white areas, and of course Native American as well. Yeah, and Appalachia. So this is not, so I want you to separate that. So there is some intersectionality between racial and ethnic minorities and low income, but not always, right? So low income does not necessarily mean that they're a minoritized group. So it could be an area that's a high poverty and it could be a white area. All right, so this is our last video, but this one doesn't even see. Oh, here we go. And this one is full of statistics, so just kind of take notes. So I'm going to go ahead and stop it there because we're asking just about this educational commitment. But I wanted you to see the statistics on that because I know we're running out of time. We have about 8 minutes left. But I did want you to see the statistic there. And particularly on this one, you need to be very careful about victim blaming. So a lot of people think, well, why don't their parents just provide them books? Why don't their parents just send them to summer camp? Because in these situations, it's just not possible sometimes. So the parents are having to work, 2 or 3 jobs, or there's just no money for summer camp and enrichment activities. So we need to be very careful, particularly with this one, like I said, about victim blaming, because I think that's something that people just fall back on. Well, why don't they just do this? Because sometimes it's just not possible. So let's look at some consequences of marginalization. So we have absenteeism. So we saw that one in this last video because of health problems, because of transportation problems, because of fear, as we saw in the LGBTQI community, because of fear of their safety, high absenteeism. And when you have high absenteeism, it's pretty hard to get, all the information that you need. Higher levels of dropping out, mental health concerns. So we saw that with all of these marginalized groups, but the LGBTQ youth and as well as the imposter syndrome, they were talking about mental health concerns. So negative impact on academic performance. And so what I want to ask you, so these are obviously consequences for an individual, right? So that they're absent a lot, they drop out, mental health, academic performance on all of these students. So again, it goes back to the question I asked at the beginning: does everyone have equal access to a quality education? So we've seen with these 3 examples that the answer is definitely no. But what I want to ask you is, what are the societal consequences? So if we have these as the personal consequences, overall, how is this harming our society? And you can think about that statistic that it was in the in that last video, that 90% once a student drops out of high school, it makes them automatically unqualifies them for 90% of jobs. So less economic growth. Okay, what else? Think about in terms of, even things you don't think about outside of the economy. If you have a group of people that have not had the same access to a quality education, that do have high dropout rates, even what's the consequences of having uninformed voters, for example? Yeah, less wealth transference, less social mobility. There's just, yeah, so maybe underdevelopment. There's a lot of issues when you have a population that is denied access to a quality education. So you have people that maybe don't think critically, certainly don't have access to higher level jobs. And like Dr. Hudson has mentioned, less growth, well, less economic growth, but also, as Pedro is pointing out, less social growth as well. And so those are a couple of pretty negative consequences. So what all this means for social justice is we're not doing a very good job right now as far as providing an equal access to quality education. So are there any questions? Before we end, we have about 3 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Oh, look, I'm on here twice. All right. Well, thank you for having me. And I appreciate your attention today, and you all have a good rest of your Friday.
So thank you very much. If we could give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Kazen. Yay. I highly recommend reading the text that was mentioned there earlier, how to be an anti-racist, because I think that actually changes your mindset. I was a former Teach for America alum. And so I know that I perpetuated the program itself. While it's well-intentioned, it brings in this idea of saviors coming into a lower income community to try to better educational outcomes for students, and then they leave after 2 years because it's only a 2-year commitment. And so there's some inherent flaws in that structure. And so while that was a well-intentioned, thought out program that's been around now for over 30 years, it has had some unintended consequences. And I think when we look at this idea and concept of social justice, and especially as we talk about educational equity and marginalization of our different populations, that sometimes the solutions that we attempt to implement don't always yield the correct results, right? That it sometimes perpetuates inequities that exist. And so I do greatly appreciate Dr. Kazen in helping us educate and navigate through this disparity, this educational disparity that exists. And really what I would love for all of you in attendance today to think about is, how can you as a global citizen work to build an equitable educational society, right? Like, so that everybody has the equal opportunity in there. And really, a lot of that is basing it on being informed on the electorate, right? And building an informed electorate around there. Because a lot of the decisions related to education policy are made in the state legislatures, are made in the localized school boards, so participate in the elections there. I'm going to go ahead and put in a survey as well, if you wouldn't mind filling that out. Please fill that out. The credit has been provided inside of the link for the event attendance has been provided in there. You need to copy it. Don't just click it. You need to copy it to paste it into your web browser. If there are no further questions, I once again just want to say thank you very much. For those who are trying to seek International Leadership Fellow, you have assignments in Blackboard. You need to complete the reflection for today by midnight, and then you have to participate in the Art for Social Change competition, and that all of the artwork and sign up is due by next week Thursday, in order to be recognized at the Emerging Leader Celebration, where you will receive a medal as well as a certificate for being an International Leadership Fellow here at TMEU. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and end our recording. If there are any further questions, please feel free to contact me.